Bestie, I'm afraid to tell you this, but women in medicine make less than men. This is a fact, we know this, but it's even worse than you think. According to the Doximity 2020 Physician Compensation Report, there are, no medical specialties in which women earned the same or more than men. And listen to the rest of the video before you comment something embarrassing. If you're thinking, well, women work less anyways, they always leave early to pick up their kids from daycare. Or if you're thinking, well, most women physicians are younger rather than older, so they just have less experience, that's why they're paid less. This study already controlled for work hours and years of experience. Behold, the specialties with the largest wage gaps between men and women. Very interesting to see OBGYN right here. And here are the specialties with the smallest wage gaps, but remember, there were no specialties in which women made even the same as men. Now you know, share this with that one friend, send it to your group chat, or tag your friend in the comments.
Hello everyone, this is Emmanuel Cook. We will be reacting to a new video today, so make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe down below, and let's get into the video.
I saw someone say that they had never heard of a woman being paid less than a man. I immediately side-eyed. It was about the type of response until I realized that the comments had already started rolling in. Let's be for real. We all know, or at least I thought we knew, the gender pay gap is still very much a thing. Black and brown women typically receive the lowest wages, as in only 84% of what men do for the same job. But it is not just a women's issue. It impacts entire families and communities. Imagine being equally qualified or even more qualified and only getting a portion of what you deserve to take back to your household. The Paycheck Fairness Act will make it much easier to sue employers for paycheck discrimination, allow for pay transparency amongst employees, strengthen protections against retaliation for workers who make discrimination complaints, and increase penalties for wage discrimination based on gender. Legislation such as this is essential for achieving wage equality across all demographics. This is why it's so important to pay attention to those local leaders who are advocating for policies that will truly move us forward. Leaders like Sherrod Brown, who was one of the original co-sponsors of the Paycheck Fairness Act. Tell Senator Brown to keep fighting to pass this legislation that will benefit our communities.
So they might cancel me for saying this, but I truly do believe that this notion of having to support people and businesses just because you share the same ethnicity or because you're from the same background is actually harmful. I used to adhere to this mindset because I was taught that given that I'm a Black woman, I need to prioritize supporting Black businesses and other minorities like myself. I was also taught that I should prioritize working with and working for people who look like myself. When I was being underpaid at a previous job, guess who tried to tell me that I deserved to be underpaid and tried to gaslight me for raising the issue of pay inequity? A Black woman and multiple Black men. For those of you who don't know, I worked on Wall Street for 5 years, and I was at a firm where they were running a diversity program for Black people that was run by Black people. One of the reasons why I took this opportunity was because I believed that given that the program was being run by people that looked like me, that they would be invested in my success and that I would have great advocates at this firm. This is particularly important when you're in a white and male-dominated field, such as finance. Came to find out that these people knew I was being underpaid along with the rest of my Black peers and did nothing about it. In fact, they even lied to us and told us that we got what we deserved. And they said that we should be grateful to even be on Wall Street in the first place. It was so bad that not only did I have to email the head of HR on behalf of myself and my Black peers, I also had to lawyer up and fight for my rights to ensure that I was compensated fairly. And here's another example. When I decided to work with a Black woman on a fashion idea, guess who stole my designs and tried to take advantage of me as someone entering this field for the first time? A Black woman did. But you know what? As an up-and-coming content creator, guess who was the first person to invite me on her podcast? A white woman. Her name is Mari Juliet, and she runs a great podcast called The Evolution of Confidence. And this is not about Black or white. I say all this to say that you could be selling yourself short by adhering to the mentality of only supporting and only working with people who look like you and who come from the same background as you. You have to remember that evil knows no bounds. Even if you share the same race, gender, ethnicity, you name it, people will still take advantage of you. And often the people who you least expect to take advantage of you will be the ones to do it. At this point in my life, I don't care what you look like. I don't care where you're from. I don't care if you're a woman like me. I don't care if you and I share the same ethnicity. I don't care. If you're good to me, I will be good to you every time. And if you play with me, you will find out every single time.
So I watch a lot of Shark Tank, and one of the quotes that always gets said whenever anybody comes in with like a crazy valuation or asks for a lot of money for their company that has like no sales, the sharks always ask this question of, oh, so you want me to pay to work for you? And I think that as a concept is inherently wrong. Nobody should be paying for labor, giving away free labor, and not getting anything in return. But I think we need to take a really critical look at that approach to how student labor and young adult labor is considered. Specifically, I'm talking about unpaid internships or entry-level positions that literally don't even pay a living wage, which I think is ridiculous, and it's very common in a lot of prestigious opportunities. In my experience, it happens in a lot of things like congressional internships. The White House internship just started paying, but for decades, that was like a completely free kind of opportunity. The UN, UNICEF, all these kinds of entities and organizations, they use interns as free labor. And I understand that they might not have a lot of funding or might not have the ability to really pay their interns, but I can't be working for free. And it leads to a lot of burnout and it leads to a lot of tension, and people aren't able to have their basic needs being met. Because I would like food on the table and a roof over my head, and I can't commit myself to working full-time hours while not getting paid anything. A perfect example is the White House internship for decades did not pay anything. They did not cover any travel, any housing, any food, nothing like that for their interns. So students were basically paying thousands and thousands of dollars for a summer to basically go and work for this opportunity. And yes, it's prestigious, it's amazing, it's a networking opportunity that's like literally the best in the world. But that does not delay the fact that I need food and money and a roof over my head. And to be able to constantly push kids into these kinds of positions leads to a lot of burnout and tension. The secondary point is it reduces diversity. People always ask the question of why certain things like congressional staffers or White House interns or congressional interns tend to come from more affluent backgrounds, tend to usually be white, and tend to usually be male. Part of that comes from the fact that these are all students who have the characteristics and attributes of somebody who is able to have their necessities being met by an outside entity, usually their parents or family. So if somebody else is paying for like your housing and your food and all your living things, you can afford to basically take an opportunity that has an amazing connections, amazing networking style, and be able to work for free. But for a lot of us, that's not an opportunity. And so we aren't able to take these positions because we have a lot of responsibilities over our heads. So by paying our interns and are paying our staffers, paying the young entry people, you're really able to increase the amount of diversity because people are able to afford to take these opportunities. I have seen the burnout firsthand when people work 50-hour weeks for like less than minimum wage. It's not healthy and it's not good. This applies outside of just like policy too. It works in like residency, it works in dental school, it works in casework where students are sometimes expected to work for like 30 hours a week as like part of their requirements to graduate. Pay people. It's not that hard.
This is another one of those PSA videos where I have to speak to people like they're 5 years old. The gender pay gap. There was some data released today about the gender pay gap in various industries and also for specific companies. The usual suspects were up in arms. I can't believe that the gender pay gap exists still. It's 2024. Equal work for equal pay. We earn 18% less than men. This is so unfair. Why is this not taught in schools? Educate yourselves before getting angry. When they're talking about the gender pay gap, they are referring to the total amount that women earn compared to the total amount that men earn. And then the difference between those two numbers makes up the gender pay gap. This is a completely useless metric. Why? Because men and women, A, work in very different industries. B, work very different hours. So that means we aren't comparing apples with apples. And then they say, well, it's not fair that female saturated industries get paid less on average. The answer to that is it's all about supply and demand. If you want to go out into the mines for 3 months at a time in dirty, disgusting, wet, cold, cave-like conditions, go right ahead. You will make dosh. But more often than not, women don't want to do that, and that's fine. Now, this might be controversial, but women also have babies. And usually when they have babies, they take a prolonged period of time off. Not all women, but some women. This means if they choose to return to work after a year, 2 years, 5 years, they may have sacrificed some opportunity for career progression. Also, many women, when they return to work after having a child, return on a part-time basis, meaning they don't work as much as their male counterparts, meaning they don't make as much money. And unfortunately, contrary to what a lot of people believe, biological women are the only people who can give birth at the moment. So until we can change that, this is the system.
There are a lot of factors that go into pay. Schooling, the amount of experience, the amount of hours worked, if a person can advocate for themselves for a raise. There are a lot of factors that influence pay.
Should women be paid the same as men? A lot of folks in the market don't think so, and this is what justifies the gender wage pay gap across different industries, even in the ones women dominate. Both education and nursing industries show you how even in industries where women are more represented, the labor of men is just seen as being a little bit more valuable. Some people ask the question, why is that? Research over me search, what the study shows that many employers devalue women's labor because they believe they're gonna get pregnant, or they already the primary caregiver of the children, which means they gotta leave work at any time to go take care of the kids. On the flip side, what the research shows is that when men have kids, employers see it as a justifiable reason to give them more money because we're supposed to be the breadwinner. On the other flip side, what it shows is that women are penalized for having their bodies in proximity to children. Think about it. When most folks think of teachers, many of the times they're thinking about women. But here you go right here. Whether women earn a post-secondary certificate or graduate from a top-tier university, they still make about 71 cents on the dollar compared with men at the same educational level. This is what the Census Bureau research found. My bad. That 70-some cent thing, I say that because depending on what study you go by, it varies by like 3 or 4 cents. That is for white women though. Black women are paid even less on the dollar, and indigenous women and Latino women are even paid less than that. But just sprinkling more context in our understanding of this wage gap, we know that it varies wildly depending on the state. This map comes from the U.S. Census Bureau in 2018 that's illustrating the darker the state, the better it says that women are paid, and the lighter the state, the worse they getting paid. There's a study done by Marquette University that showed even when it comes to nursing, female registered nurse earned an average of $72,000, whereas male counterparts earned $78,000. In a society where women are forced to have kids, how does this dictate their bottom line or their mere access and resources when it comes to the job market? Seems like a lot.
So I talk about how Latinas experience the widest pay gap more than any other race compared to white men. But what about in fields that have a set salary scale? For example, most K through 12 education systems have a predetermined salary scale based on your years of experience and your certifications or degrees. Meaning, if I am a first-year teacher with a bachelor's degree, I'm going to get the same rate of pay as, for example, Mr. Smith, who is also a first-year teacher and has the same credentials, who is a white man. So there's no pay inequality there. However, the inequities still seep in. So we know that leaders tend to endorse others into leadership if they're similar to them. So our principal, who is also a white man, is more likely to look at Mr. Smith, who is my colleague, as someone who has leadership qualities or someone who has potential to go into leadership. So what happens? Our principal starts to provide him some mentoring. He starts to give him some guidance. He gives him some encouragement about what trainings he should take, who he should network with. And within a few years, Mr. Smith is now Principal Smith, and he's on a different, much higher salary scale than I am. And because Latinas only make up 9% of principals nationwide, it is far less likely that I'm going to find a mentor who's going to see me and recognize the leadership qualities that I possess.
A quick reminder, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe down below, and let's continue the video.
Gender pay gap doesn't exist. Women just choose lower paying jobs. Welcome to dumb shit people say I can disprove in just under a minute. So you often hear people say that women earn less because they choose lower paying professions like teaching or nursing. And while it's true that on average these jobs are lower paid today, that wasn't always the case. Before women were allowed to have jobs that require qualifications, it was men who occupied all of the professions we considered as feminine today. For instance, nurses used to be exclusively male, but then as women started to move into those occupations, they began paying less. And that's also confirmed by the largest study on this topic to date, done by Paula England. In some professions, wages declined as much as 57 percentage points when they went from being predominantly male to female. In some others, they declined by 34 or 21. So no, women don't choose lower paying jobs. Jobs become lower paid when women take over a previously male-dominated field.
It still surprises me to this day how many people don't understand what the gender pay gap actually is. I'm returning to work next year, 2025, and it's been on my mind because I feel like I am the perfect example of how the gender pay gap actually happens. So I thought we could discuss. A lot of people misunderstand what the gender pay gap is, and they think that it's comparing a man and a woman in the exact same position and that the man is getting paid more than the woman. That's actually incorrect. That's highly illegal. It doesn't really happen, not the main contributing factor to the gender pay gap. What causes the gender pay gap is primarily the fact that women all around the world are still the main caregivers. Be it raising children, that could be caring for a sick family member, having children. Often the woman will take maternity leave, and during this time they will take an extended period of time off, which may be paid, might be paid at a lower rate. There might be periods of unpaid time off work. And that not only is it time out of the workforce, not being engaged in your workplace, it's also time earning less money, time contributing less to your super. There are multiple things that affects having that chunk of time off work. When women do return to work, if they choose to return after having kids, it is often the woman that returns to work in a reduced capacity. And so they may have been working full time prior to having children, and they might return to work part time. Now, it is still far more common to see the woman return to work at a reduced capacity compared to the male. So in my situation, when I had my son, he's now almost 3 years old, I took 12 months off work. My husband at the time took, I think, a total of 8 weeks off work. So you can see there a big gap in what I would have been earning and contributing to my super during that time and versus what the time he had off work. Then when I returned to work, I returned at about 75% of what I used to work. So again, I'm earning less than what he is. You're probably less likely to receive promotions when you're part-time. You're less engaged in the workforce as a whole, and it really does put a barrier there to progressing your career down the line when you are working at reduced hours. So some might say, well, the women are choosing to go to work part-time, and let's discuss that, because I don't necessarily agree. I think there are definitely women that choose to not work at all or to work part-time purely because it's their choice with no other external factors. But I think a lot of people have a lot of barriers against them. Circumstances when we're looking at childcare, that is a huge barrier for parents, but specifically women, because like we said, women take the brunt of the caretaking responsibilities to return to the workforce. The cost might be a factor. Even getting any childcare altogether might be a factor. I know where we live, it is so hard to get a place at a childcare centre. The hours that the childcare centre is open, all these factors are prohibitive in women working or working to the hours of which they would ideally like to. All the while you're in a hetero relationship, your male partner might be progressing in their own career, earning more than you, and it really does put a strain when you're deciding who returns to work. If the male partner is earning more than you and you need that income, then 9 times out of 10 you are going to choose for that person to work at the full-time capacity rather than the female in the relationship. I'm so passionate about this topic. I think there are so many things that both the government and employers should and can be doing. Firstly, let's make childcare more accessible to parents so that it doesn't all fall back on the female. Let's take it a step further. Let's get males to step up to the plate. Now, I know lots of workplaces are now offering paternity leave, and what that means is whether you're the mum or the dad, you both get offered the same amount of time off, which is amazing. We're just about to access that with our second child when I return to work, and I am honestly so excited for my husband to take on that role for a period of time. Let's normalize men reducing their working hours to take care of the children. That's a really big factor. And if we were able to equally distribute that load of caring for the children between both males and females, and for workplaces to be normalizing and accepting of that, that will make a huge difference in the gender pay gap. Obviously, the gender pay gap is not only caused by women having families, there are other factors as well, but it is a huge contributing factor. The other thing, which is such a shame, is that we just don't see women progress in their careers like men do. I think all these factors that we've just discussed has a lot to do with it, but it's also just society's expectations of a woman's role, what they think they're capable of, and the opportunities that they're given. These industries as a whole, what we see is the further you go in your career, the less likely a woman is to hold those positions, and that needs to change. Here, I feel like we would get along swimmingly, but what does your family do? How have you managed your paternity leaves, your return to work, and how often do these things play on your mind? Because literally it is my Roman Empire.
I love that the conversation about white versus non-white pay in the influencer industry is happening right now, but I fear it is worse in corporate America. And truly because of proximity. And what I mean by that is you will be sitting right next to someone every day who does the exact same job that you do and be getting paid less, right? Like, I remember I was working in one newsroom in particular, and another producer, for whatever reason, was asked to get an envelope. Now, thank God she was nosy, because her nosy ass looked in that envelope, and there it was, our paychecks, like in physical form, our pay rates rather. And old girl reported back to the producers that she trusted. And that's when I found out I was getting paid significantly lower than a producer who I sat across from every single day and did the exact same job as her every single day. I'm talking thousands less. And you can take one guess what she looks like. And it almost made me physically ill, okay, to know every day when I walked into that office that I was truly sitting next to someone and getting paid less than them every day, doing the same job.
So at my job right now, I get paid $1 more, only because I have 5 months of prior experience. But I have a coworker who has about 8 years of experience, right? So his pay is probably like $8 more or something like that.
Hi, thank you for this question. I feel like people are getting confused between pay parity and pay equity, so I really wanted to clear this up. So let's talk about pay parity first. This one is pretty straightforward. It's about making sure that people that are doing the exact same job get paid the same, regardless of things like gender. So in your example, a male nurse and a female nurse doing the exact same job with the same responsibilities, the same hours, they should be paid the same. If a woman was getting paid less for being a nurse purely based on the fact that she was a woman, that would be illegal. And that's covered under the Equal Pay Act. That is what we would call a pay parity issue, and yes, you're right, it would be on the employer. Then there's pay equity, and this is where it gets a little bit deeper. Pay equity is more about looking at whole industries and asking, is this job underpaid because it's predominantly done by women? Historically, jobs like social work, caregiving, teaching, nursing have all been undervalued. And that's because historically they've been seen as women's work. So it's not about comparing a male nurse to a female nurse. It's about saying, hey, is caregiving getting paid a bit less than, say, I don't know, a construction worker, even though both take a lot of responsibility, care, health and safety? So pay equity looks at whether female-dominated industries are getting paid fairly comparatively to male-dominated industries. A big example of this in New Zealand was the Christine Bartlett case. Care workers fought hard for the right to earn fair wages after their work had been undervalued for decades. So that was a pay equity win. So to sum it up, pay parity, same job, same pay. Pay equity is fair pay across industries, making sure women's work isn't undervalued. Both are super important, but pay equity is a little bit more systemic. It's about fixing those deeper inequalities in industries and how different industries are valued. I hope this clears that up, and I hope everyone is getting ready to act. I'm gonna start making my protest posters tomorrow.
We all hate when something's not equal, but there's nothing that grinds us more than finding out someone we work with that does the same job as us, or sometimes even less, might make more than us. This is a huge topic. So I'm studying behavioral economics, and one of the topics we've been discussing over the last week was inequity aversion, and that essentially says we like when things are equal. I think one of the most notable conversations we've had in a while is the gender pay inequity, and that is the idea that there could be women in the exact same roles as a man, yet the pay will be different. Oftentimes you'll see the women making less than a man, and it varies all over the world. So I don't want to get into exact stats of what that is, but I know often in the country that I live, it can be actually 20% less. I finished reading a Harvard Business Review study that this is a Danish study that was done, and it talked about the gender pay gap disparity. And what happened is that they did this study amongst a bunch of businesses, and for businesses that had more than 35 employees, they were required to disclose the salary of all of the employees. Wouldn't you have loved that? Anyway, what they found, the results that they found was when there was transparency around the wages, the disparity between men's and women's wages for doing the exact same job were reduced. That gap got smaller, but that wasn't the only thing. The other thing they noted was that they tended to start hiring more women, and they tended to start promoting more women, and women began to get more leadership roles within a business. But one of the big concerns obviously was, once this happened, once there was more women in these roles, more women period at the company, and they were making the same amount as men, was there going to be a productivity decrease? Were some of the men going to feel a little inadequate that women were making the same amount as them? No, actually, the productivity was not affected by having this transparency. And not only that, but employees felt more equal knowing that they were making a fair number compared to their peers that were doing different roles. And one of the things that we studied actually in school this week was when you find out that somebody has a greater salary than you, but they're doing the same role, it's actually a demotivator, and it causes employees to start to leave the company. The other thing is when you find out that someone above you, what their salary is, it actually makes you more motivated to strive to earn the promotion for that next level. So
I think that pay transparency should be a law, especially in this country. That will just help a lot of people get paid the same. That would remove all of the nepotism and favoritism at work. It would remove majority of that stuff. Bring pay transparency into law. I would certainly vote for something like that.
Oh, that subject. Quite simple. There isn't one. It is the most debunked thing of debunked things of all debunked things. The pay gap. So, besides the fact that there's a law in place, okay, let's go ahead and think about this logically, which means it's time to put our emotions on the sofa for about 2 minutes, and let's think about this logically. If there was a pay gap, and you could pay women 25% less, right? Let's only hire men so that we can pay them more. Wait, that's not how companies work. We should only hire women because we can pay them less. Okay, that aside, because, logic doesn't work well in the feminist community. It's a law. If you, let's say Susie and Johnny are working and Johnny earns more, guess what? He probably has more experience. He probably has a higher degree. He probably did better on his test scores. He probably has been there for 5 years longer than you. Something of that nature. Or, ready? He might work overtime. More overtime. Men do work about 33% more overtime, which might explain the 25-ish% more that they earn. That's weird. Again, it makes logical sense. Okay, so then they move to the earnings gap because, second, they can't argue the pay gap anymore because at this point it's been so debunked. But there is that earnings gap. You're absolutely right, there is earning gaps. Men work 33% more overtime hours, right? Dear people, I haven't seen a single woman fight to build a road, ever. I haven't heard a woman fight to say we need more women in the military. By the way, ladies holding it strong at about 2% for all of humankind volunteering for the military. You 2%, you're awesome. Let's say 98%, you aren't trying to be carpenters, you aren't trying to be house builders, you aren't trying to be automotive technicians. It's the male patriarchy preventing us. Excuse me, give me an example of what is preventing you. Oh, yeah, that doesn't exist either. Gosh darn it. If that was the case, then why do we have a mandatory 25% of the upper to middle management must be female by the government? Which, by the way, if it's mandatory, that means that they're going to promote ladies who aren't in that field to meet that quota, which is where we run into companies are going downhill. Because instead of rather promoting the person who has earned it the most, they promoting you because you're female? That sounds exactly the opposite of a patriarchy. That sounds like Women are trying to control the narrative. Oh. But that's probably not it either. The reality is, all these same things about getting paid less happens to men too. All right? Co-workers earn less, earn more than each other. By the way, it doesn't matter whether your coworker earns more or less than you. You know what does matter? If they are exactly the same tenure, they started on the same day, at the same time, with the same degree, with the same experience, the same work history, right? And they're earning more than you. You can sue the ever-loving shit out of them. The law is on your side, and believe it or not, the government loves to take down a company because the government gets a huge amount of money when you bring that lawsuit up. Except for these lawsuits don't get brought up because it's not true. Just throwing it out there. If there's any other really bad examples that I missed, and you haven't actually seen debunked before, there's literally nothing about the patriarchy that hasn't been debunked. There's literally nothing about the pay gap or earnings gap that hasn't been debunked. The earnings gap is real, but it's not because we live in a patriarchy. It's because women choose to work less strenuous, more white-collar-y jobs, right? But if we're going to argue like that, then we should mandate that 25% of the healthcare field is men. Huh? Let's mandate that. Let's mandate that men join the healthcare field. I'm down. Okay. Why would we not want to do this? Well, men don't really want to join the healthcare field, which means we'd have to promote men into the healthcare field that would do a lesser job than their female equivalents who actually spent the time learning and working and getting good at the job. So that would mean that our medical field would probably go downhill. Now, let's mandate men in the healthcare field, much like women are mandated in the upper echelon of business. I think that would solve a lot of problems when all of a sudden your healthcare goes to dog shit. And you wonder why companies are trying to figure out how to circumvent the middle management by using AI to replace the entire middle management, because an AI is neither male nor female. Just saying.
Okay, proof that there's still inequality between men and women and their pay in the workplace. So 5 years ago, before we had TikTok, I was a general manager at a restaurant and bar. This was a very busy one. I had a lot of tasks, had a lot of responsibilities, and they finally were going to hire an AGM for me because I had been doing all of the tasks with no help. By the way, they had bullied me into this position. I was actually a bartender, then events coordinator. They needed me to be a GM. They said I was the only responsible worker. I was the only one that they trusted with this job. So they really, really tied me into this position with lower pay by guilting me. So anyway, a few months later, they're hiring their GM, and they hire these two men that are actors, and it's a temp job for them. So they're only there for a few months. They're only there for like 6 months. They have almost a third of the responsibilities that I still have. They didn't really take on most of the work. I find out that they are getting paid $5 more an hour than I do. Not only that, but when I would try to extend my hand to teach them things, how to do things correctly, how to handle the customers correctly, because they were not doing so, they had a lot of like male ego, and they would be very combative with the customers, and it just wasn't working well. They would completely write me off, and in meetings, I couldn't even get a word in, even though I was the general manager. I was above them, but making less and not being heard. I remember walking into the office for one of the AGMs and asking, he was doing paperwork. So I asked him, can I help you with anything? Like meaning paperwork. And he looked up, he's like, yeah, can you get me a cup of coffee? Dude, that's not what I meant. I literally said to him, oh, I meant with the paperwork, but okay. And he just like kind of nervously laughed. So that was his mindset. I remember once we were handing out food to a big party, food to guests, and one was dairy-free person, and I saw him carrying a burger that looked like it had cheese on it, and I was like, hey, that looks like it has cheese on it. And he's like, no, it's not. It's dairy-free. It's dairy-free. There's no cheese. There's no cheese. I was like, it looks like there's cheese. He's like, no. He gives it to the man. The man calls me over. Of course, there's cheese on it. I was so pissed. The customer got so upset. And the manager, the AGM, I was like, I told you that it had cheese on it. I don't know why you gave it to him. He goes over and he was like super combative with him. Again, a male ego. So I just don't understand why they were ever paid more than me. By the way, that job ended up like telling me, you know, I can't go away for the holidays because I was in charge of all the holiday parties. So I couldn't book to go back and see my family. And then 2 days before Christmas, they told us that the entire business was shutting down. So they had not let me take off those weeks to go home because there was too much to do. But then 2 days before Christmas, they shut down anyway. And then it was too late to get flight tickets, and everything was like $1,500 for last minute flights. And again, that whole business was owned by men. So.
Oh, not to mention, but when that place shut down unexpectedly, I had booked all the Christmas parties and wedding receptions and all of that in the next few months. And guess whose phone number and email all those people had? Mine. So they were coming to me, where's my deposit? I need my deposit back. We need to rebook the wedding. And they gave me no notice for any of my clients. They just shut down. And then they have all my personal info. So I was trying to give them the owner's info and he never answered anything. So I was left to kind of clean up the entire mess for them.
It's like my equal in my department. So we like co-lead a department. He's getting paid $25,000 more.
So this creator is sharing how her colleague, equal in title, responsibility, and experience, is making $25,000 more than she is. Let's break it down because it's juicy. So first, let's acknowledge the glaring inequality. The fact that you and your predecessor were making the same salary, but then the new hire was brought in at a significantly higher rate to be more competitive, which jobs do that, without revisiting your pay. That's a clear oversight, okay? Competitive salaries should apply to also retention, just as much as they do recruitment. Now, she did mention that her supervisor admitted that they are both equal in the role, but hesitated about the increase because $25,000 was just too much of a jump. Like, but you're willing to pay someone else $25,000? What? Here's the thing. If they value you equally, why wasn't the salary adjusted to reflect that before you had to bring it up? It's not your fault that they failed to proactively ensure your pay and equity. Now, this could be due to budget constraints, why they can't make the big jump, but more likely it's because you're already in the role. You're already doing the job, so they don't ever think about what they can do to retain you. They just assume you're not going to leave. Employers often operate on that belief that existing employees are less likely to negotiate or leave compared to new hires. But this creates distrust and resentment, kind of like what you're experiencing right now. Now, the big elephant in the room, you mentioned that you're queer and have a disability and your colleague does not. While employers may not openly acknowledge bias, the lack of transparency, it's going to leave you in a position where you're like forced to kind of wonder, is that the reason why? You know, like it makes you wonder like whether your identity is playing a role in their decision. Employers who fail to clearly explain pay decisions open the door to these kinds of doubts, and that's honestly not on you. That's on them. So finally, if I were in your position, here's what I'd do. First, I would document everything. Keep records of your conversations with your supervisor, your job performance, and how it aligns with your colleagues. Document everything. Keep everything. The second would be to schedule another meeting. Present your case calmly but assertive and explain why there's a pay disparity and how it's unacceptable, and ask for a timeline of how it's going to get addressed and what is actually going to get addressed. And the third would be to explore other opportunities. If they're not willing to match your worth despite recognizing your value, I think it's time to consider leaving. Your loyalty is important, yes, but so is your dignity and your financial equity. And this is specifically to this creator. You deserve more. That's it. You deserve more than to feel undervalued and dismissed. Staying depends on whether you believe this employer is willing to change and grow, or if you're just gonna deal with the disparity and quietly accept it and just keep doing the work that you're doing. Now, to anyone that is in a similar situation, remember, advocate for yourself. Whether you stay or you go, just know your worth and don't ever settle for less than you deserve. Now, let me know in the comments, what would you do in her position?
I want to talk about it being tough out here, because we can talk about it being tough out here. I'm going to tell you something that if you don't know will absolutely fucking blow your mind. And I'm going to need you to stay with me because this affects you even if you don't think it does. Worldwide, 2% of venture capital funding goes to women founders. If you're listening to this and you're not an entrepreneur, you're going to be like, okay, cool, I don't want to start a business. That's not a problem for me. How many times have we sat next to a man that's been like, oh, the gender pay gap doesn't exist. It's illegal. You can't be paid a different amount for the same job. And therefore, we do have gender equality now. Absolutely. Absolutely the fuck not. If you look around and you look at your phone, you look at the software you're using, you look at the clothes you're wearing, I can bet that the very large majority of that will have been made because of venture capital funding. So you look at that list of richest women, right? You look at that list of richest men. What have they done? They have built companies, and they have built companies through getting venture funding. It is almost impossible to grow a big business without getting venture capital funding. And so don't even talk about this being like fucking tough out here when the playing field is so far from level. Earlier this year, when my 2 male co-founders decided to start a company with me, their chances of raising funding for that business decreased by 81.5% by just adding me as a co-founder, adding someone, a whole person with a great education who's built successful businesses before, adding me to the co-founders decreased their possibilities of raising funding by 81.5%. Fine, you don't care about that. Let's talk about how this affects fucking everyone. So first of all, we know that women-founded companies hire more women, they pay women more, they have more equitable policies for women. They also, statistically, in case you didn't know, far outperform male-founded companies when venture-backed. And even if none of those things come into your radar and you are absolutely fine with all of those things, then let me tell you that this funding gap is exactly why we are building a world for men by men. We talk about having gender equality. We talk about how far we've come. Yes, we've come so far. But it is things exactly like this funding gap, which mean that, for example, 97% of all of the scientific data we have on the human body, 97% is based only on men. It's 2024. How can you complain about something like the fact that the women who are richest in the world are richest by divorce? Do you know what got their husbands that money? Building companies. Statistically, women cannot even get fucking close. So how about you stop whining about the fact that apparently these women want money when actually what they want is lowered barriers to entry so that they can build their own shit, build a world that is actually made for them and grow economies. But before that playing field is even close to level, that's just not.
The main reason why women-led companies do a lot better than male-led companies is because women make a lot more realistic goals than men do. They take more calculated steps than men do. And they make a lot less risky choices than men do. They grow at a more sustained pace than men do. And this is great for businesses, especially in the beginning. I appreciate you guys watching the video today. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.